You know this story. You learned it in school, or from a book, or from a movie. Maybe you first heard it because of Percy Jackson, or Hadestown, or one of a thousand retellings that have made it one of the most recognizable myths in human history. You know it like this. A young goddess Persephone, daughter of Demeter, was picking flowers in a meadow when the earth cracked open beneath her feet. Hades, god of the underworld, rose from below and took her, kidnapped her, dragged her into his dark kingdom while she screamed for her mother. Demeter searched the world in grief. The crops died, winter came, and eventually Zeus forced a deal. Persephone would return to the living world for part of the year, spring and summer, and return to the underworld for the rest. The pomegranate seeds she had eaten bound her there. That is the story you know. Now let me tell you what the oldest sources actually say. The version of Persephone's story that most people know comes primarily from the Homeric hymn to Demeter, a text written somewhere between the 7th and 6th century BC. It is a beautiful piece of literature. It is also one of the most politically motivated myths in the ancient Greek canon. It was written, most scholars believe, to explain and justify the Eleusinian mysteries, the most sacred and secretive religious rituals in ancient Greece, held at the town of Eleusis for nearly 2000 years. The hymn was essentially the founding document of a religion, and like all founding documents, it had an agenda. The agenda was this: Demeter is supreme, the earth goddess, the mother of agriculture, the giver of grain. She is the source of all life and all order. Her grief causes winter, her joy causes spring. The entire living world revolves around her emotional state. In that narrative, Persephone is not a protagonist. She is a symbol, a prop, the thing that is taken and returned. But here is what is strange. When you go further back into the fragments, the older texts, the pre-Olympian traditions, a completely different Persephone begins to emerge. One who was never taken, one who was already there. In the oldest Greek cosmological traditions, the ones that predate the Olympian pantheon, the ones that belong to the pre-Greek cultures of the Aegean, there was a goddess of the underworld whose name was simply Persephone or Persephonia. She had no origin story, she had no mother, she had no meadow. She was simply the queen of the dead. That was her entire identity. She ruled the realm beneath the earth, and she had always ruled it, and that was the complete and whole truth of her. She was not a victim of the underworld. She was the underworld. The Greeks who came after the ones who built the Olympian system, who organized their gods into families and hierarchies and gave every deity a birth story and a parent, they had a problem with this. An original queen of the dead, with no origin, no mother, no attachment to the world above, was a profoundly unsettling figure. She could not be controlled, she could not be bargained with, she owed nothing to anyone. So they gave her a mother, and in giving her a mother, they gave her a story. And in giving her a story, they turned a sovereign queen into a kidnapping victim. This is not speculation. The scholar Walter Burkert, one of the most respected authorities on Greek religion in the 20th century, documented the transformation extensively. The pre-Hellenic Persephone was a death goddess in her own right, worshipped independently, feared and revered as the absolute ruler of what lay beneath. The Olympian Persephone, daughter of Demeter, bride of Hades, the girl in the meadow, was a later construction, an attempt to make sense of and domesticate an older power. Let us talk about the pomegranate seeds, because this is where the story becomes truly strange. In the Homeric hymn, the reason Persephone cannot permanently return to the living world is that she ate 6 pomegranate seeds while in the underworld. This binds her to Hades' realm ancient rules, the law of the dead. You cannot eat the food of a place without belonging to it in some measure. This is presented as Hades' trick, a trap. He gave her the seeds, some versions say, specifically so she could not leave. But consider what eating means, symbolically, in every ancient culture. In ancient Greece, to eat someone's food in their house was to accept their hospitality, to voluntarily enter into relationship with them. It was not a passive act, it was a choice with meaning. And Persephone, remember, was not a naive mortal. She was a goddess, a daughter of Olympus, raised by the most powerful earth deity in the pantheon. She knew what eating that fruit would mean. She ate it anyway. Some ancient commentators noticed this too. The 2nd century writer Pausanias, in his description of Greece, includes details about Persephone mythology that diverge sharply from the hymn. In his accounts and in several mystery cult traditions, Persephone's descent is not a kidnapping at all, it is a willing journey, a goddess going to claim what was already hers. The pomegranate seeds were not a trap. They were a declaration. The ancient Greeks feared Hades. That much is well documented. They avoided speaking his name. They used euphemisms instead, calling him Plauton, the rich one, or the unseen one, or simply the Lord below. There was a deep and ancient superstition that naming him directly might draw his attention. But here is what is less often discussed. Hades, among all the Olympian gods, was the one with the least number of myths about cruelty. Think about what the other gods did. Zeus raped, Poseidon drowned whole civilizations on a whim. Apollo flayed a man alive for winning a music contest. Athena turned a woman into a spider for the crime of weaving too well. Hera tortured anyone Zeus had ever smiled at. Artemis killed hunters who accidentally saw her bathe. The Olympian gods, as a collective, were vain, jealous, petty, and casually monstrous. Hades, by contrast, appears in ancient texts as something remarkably different. He was just, he was fair, he did not play favorites, he did not leave his realm to interfere in human wars, he did not take mortal lovers and destroy their lives, he presided over the dead with an even hand and asked only one thing, that everyone eventually come to him. Even Sisyphus, the trickster who famously chained death and prevented anyone from dying, was eventually caught and punished not for cheating Hades, but for the chaos his interference caused in the world above. Hades did not pursue, he did not threaten, he simply waited. He was always going to win in the end. In this context, the idea that Hades would abduct and imprison a goddess against her will starts to feel like precisely the kind of story told about a figure whose power people feared but whose actual nature they couldn't easily justify fearing. You cannot easily tell stories of a fair, patient, inevitable god, but you can tell stories of a kidnapper, and kidnapper stories spread faster. In the mystery traditions of Eleusis, the ones the hymn was written to support, initiates underwent a ritual that was kept so secret that we still do not fully know what it involved. People who revealed the mysteries were executed. For nearly 2,000 years, not a single initiate broke their oath completely. What we know is this: the ritual involved a descent, a symbolic death, a confrontation with whatever waited in the dark, and then a return, a transformation, an understanding of something that could not be taught in words, only experienced. Persephone was the center of these mysteries, not as a victim, not as the girl who was taken, as the guide, as the one who had made the journey herself and returned changed, as the goddess who knew both worlds, the living and the dead, and could stand in either without being destroyed by it. The Greek word for her role was psychopomp, the conductor of souls, the one who walks between. Does that sound like a kidnapping victim to you? The initiates of Eleusis were not worshipping a goddess who had suffered and been rescued. They were worshipping a goddess who had chosen the most terrifying thing in existence, death itself, and made it her home, who had looked into the abyss not because she was thrown into it, but because she was curious about what it contained, who had eaten the pomegranate seeds not because she was strict, but because she tasted them and decided she wanted to stay. Not forever. 6 months was enough. She always came back. Spring always came back. But the point, the sacred, initiatory, life-changing point of the Eleusinian mysteries was that she had been there. She had seen what waited, and she was not afraid. None of this means Demeter's grief was false, and this is the part of the story that breaks your heart if you let it. Demeter searched the world for 9 days. In the hymn, she carries torches and refuses to eat or bathe or rest. She approaches mortals in disguise, unable to tell them who she is or what she has lost. She sits in grief at a well and a kind family takes her in. The crops die not because she chooses to punish humanity. The crops die because she simply stops. She forgets to tend them. She is too consumed by loss to remember that the world needs her. This is the most human thing in all of Greek mythology. Here is a goddess of immeasurable power, the source of all food, all growth, all abundance, and she is sitting by a well in disguise, inconsolable, because her daughter is gone. Not because her daughter was taken, necessarily, but because her daughter left. That is a different grief entirely. The grief of a mother whose child has chosen something the mother cannot follow them into. The grief of loving someone so completely that their becoming who they are, separate, sovereign, unreachable, feels like a wound that cannot close. Demeter's winter was not revenge. It was a mother who had not yet learned that love and possession are different things. And Persephone, coming back every spring, was not returning out of obligation or imprisonment. She was coming back because she loved her mother. She just also loved the dark. The story of Persephone has been retold thousands of times across 3,000 years. Poems, operas, novels, musicals, films, every generation finds something different in it. For a long time, the retelling focused on the romance Hades and Persephone as a dark love story, the unlikely pairing, beauty and death. More recently, writers and artists have begun returning to something older. They are reclaiming the Persephone who chose, the one who was not rescued, the one who looked at the underworld and said, "Yes, I want to know what this is, I want to know what lives here, I want to be the person who understands both sides." There is a reason this version resonates so deeply right now. We live in a world that often tells the same story. The Homeric hymn told that the dark is something that happens to you, not something you can face on your own terms, that the underworld is a place of punishment and imprisonment, not wisdom, that the right response to darkness is to flee back to the light as fast as possible and pretend it wasn't real. But the Eleusinian initiates knew something different. They descended on purpose, in ritual, and they came back. And whatever they saw in that descent, whatever Persephone showed them in the dark, it changed them in a way that 2,000 years of testimony describes as the end of the fear of death. Not because they learned death was painless, not because they were promised paradise, but because they had seen, in the figure of Persephone herself, that it was possible to go all the way down into the worst thing, and come back carrying flowers.